Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Congregation Netivot Shalom. My name is Menachem Creditor. I'm the rabbi here. This is Josh Kornbluth. I think some of you might know who he is. We are really, really proud to stand together. We always have, and we're always proud of it. We like doing it when no one's watching, so we can just be ourselves. And in fact, tonight is going to be us being ourselves with you all. Tonight is a conversation that was sparked actually 3 months ago, I think, is when we first started this iteration of what we were hoping to accomplish. And we'll each have a chance to sort of take our turn in sharing, and then we'll talk to each other. Then we're going to ask you to do chavruta in traditional Jewish terms. That means talk to each other in dialogue, to be a dialogical group who can actually look each other in the eyes. And then we'll have a chance to close up. This will be an inadequate conversation. Okay, for anyone who presumes that we are going to come to a place of resolution, obviously not in terms of the world, but even in terms of our in-this-room conversation, this is not what that's about, right? That is a geopolitical question, and we have a lot to say about it, but we aren't here to try to convince each other. And so there are a few ways that I'd like to frame our conversation, which is the way it was advertised, and to be clear, it is the expectation that we have of each other. There are rules for our conversation because in Berkeley, it's actually quite important to point out what isn't a conversation. I remember when I moved here 8 years ago, I had the impression at first that Berkeley didn't like rules. And then I came to realize that actually Berkeley just doesn't like anyone else's rules. And we have our own that we take quite seriously. And we can laugh at it because we know it to be true, but the latent fundamentalism of any community is one that actually requires naming. And so one of the things we are going to absolutely oppose as a team, let alone in each other, is any kind of fundamentalism, where my truth is the only possible one. That is not going to be how we speak to each other, and that is not going to be how we as a community tonight speak to each other at all. So, a few different things. One of them is, here are the rules for the conversation, and these are the ones that Josh and I developed together. If your position is that Israel should cease to exist as a Jewish homeland, that is not the conversation we're going to have. If you believe Jews are better than Palestinians, that is not the conversation we're going to have. If you believe that only Jews have the right to a state, that is not the conversation we're going to have. If you believe Israel's concerns about security are imagined, that is not the conversation we're going to have. If you disagree with any of these principles, that's your right. But that's not what tonight's about. Tonight is about a specific kind of conversation that is not only typified very well by a book that has made tremendous, tremendous impacts around the world by Ari Shavit, who's an Israeli journalist who works for Haaretz, the leading sort of liberal newspaper in Israel. He has gained a tremendous following over the years, and this book has really capped his career in important ways. There are a few things I'd like to say just before I hand off to Josh. One of them is that the sheets that you have at the very bottom the format for the evening. Also on the sheets is a reminder of the rules that I read. Please take them seriously. The format for this evening goes like this. I'm going to be done welcoming us in a moment. Then Josh is going to have an opening reflection. Then I'm going to have an opening reflection. Then Josh and I are going to share a public conversation. And then we're going to sort of give you guided questions for a period of time. It's not going to be enough. It will be enough to look each other in the eyes and to know that you're not the only one in pain. And then there'll be a closing reflection from Josh and a closing reflection from me. We'll be clear, there isn't time for the conversation we need to have. Not in 2 nights, not likely in a lifetime or 3. But we're going to have a conversation all too rare in the world today. So, the most important thing I can say at first is that framing. The framing is this. There will be no applause tonight. If you've been involved in any of our community's conversations about Israel, you've probably seen people at their rhetorical best. And it seems like a sport sometimes. It isn't actually about addressing the real pain, of which there is plenty to go around. It is about winning. Winning on behalf of whichever, whomever. There will be no applause tonight because no one is winning in the world tonight. If we had announced that tonight was about the Yazidi, half of you would have shown up. If we had said that tonight was about Michael Brown, an 18-year-old boy who was shot needlessly for the color of his skin, no one would have shown up, maybe 5 of you. Now, I don't mean to castigate, I do mean to say that we have a fixation on certain conflicts, and that is born of commitments that we have. I would not belittle them, but they are absolutely curious. And so tonight should be as dignified a conversation as we would have had about any one of those issues. Not less dignified because we care more. And in fact, should we care more about part of the world's pain? That's not a rhetorical point. That is just universal pain that should be felt for every headline. Because there are no good ones recently. You could be a migrant child in the south of this country, absolutely abandoned by the United States and the world. You could be a tribe older than Islam, trapped on a mountain, somewhat now, a few of them are now back home, but if you read the headlines today on CNN, they are being killed by their neighbors back home, which for a Jewish narrative sounds a whole lot too familiar. So the last thing I want to say before I hand off the microphone to Josh is this. We are a community of prayer. We are a community of faith. Every Saturday, every Shabbat, we have recited this prayer for the last number of weeks, and we will keep on reciting it until there is no need. I cannot imagine a person in the room, forget believing in God, because that's less important than believing in the dignity of another human being who shouldn't die. So don't worry about your belief. Let's just have some faith, a little bit of hope. This is a prayer written by 2 religious leaders. It's called the Mother's Prayer. It was written by Sheikha Ibtisam Mahmoud and Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum. It was written about Muslims and Jews, but boy, are there plenty of other people since it was written who could use this prayer. So I don't ask you to believe in the God that I pray to. But what I do ask you to do is hear these words and let it set the tone for our heart's conversation tonight. We are not going to win if we're trying to win. This prayer is far from that, and I'll ask you at least to open your hearts to its words. God of life, you who heal the brokenhearted, binding up our wounds, please hear this prayer of mothers. You did not create us to kill each other, nor to live in fear or rage or hatred in your world. You created us so that we would allow each other to sustain your name in this world. Your name is life. Your name is peace. For these I weep, my eye sheds water. For our children crying in the night, for parents holding infants, despair and darkness in their hearts. For a gate that is closing, who will rise to open it before the day is gone? With my tears and with my constant prayers, with the tears of all women deeply pained at these harsh times, I raise my hands to you in supplication. Please, God, have mercy on us. Hear our voice that we not despair, that we will witness life with each other, that we have mercy for each other, that we share sorrow one with the other, that we hope together. Inscribe our lives in the book of life. For your sake, our God of life, let us choose life. For you are peace. Your world is peace, and all that is yours is peace. May this be your will, and I will say, Amen. I'm going to hand the microphone to Josh, and I just want to praise him for half a second. There's a tradition not to do the entire praising of a person. So let me just say, for those of you who, when you hear Josh is going to perform or share, there have been moments where at shul we do something together and people presume it's going to be funny. But Josh happens to be quite skilled at being funny, and personally, he's actually pretty funny. But this isn't about that. This is about the life that laughter is supposed to lead toward. And so, what I treasure most about Josh is not that he makes me laugh, even though he does. What I treasure most about Josh is that he is in pursuit of a good world. He brings that to every piece of art that he has created, and he brings it to a community that loves him very much.
Thank you.
So I should sit in this chair. It's really beautiful to see you all here. Okay. Israel and Palestine. Menachem. I was raised in, as I talked about it in endless, incredibly lucrative shows. I was raised by communists, and I was raised in an ideology. A lot of that ideology, a lot of what my parents raised me in was about justice and for equality and to make the world better, and the last shall be first. And then when I came to shul here for the first time in my life at the age of 50, 5 years ago, I was shocked and delighted to find the same preoccupations here as well. Preoccupations for being good, for being just, for having a meaningful life. And my friendship with Menachem, my studies, my bar mitzvah that we had, that Menachem carried out for me in the Negev desert 3 years ago with my family, are all huge parts of my life. This community. The issue to me of Israel and Palestine has been the one issue that I am often perplexed, Menachem, by your, okay. Here's the thing. For me, again, taking it from me personally, I was raised also, my parents happened to be ideologically very much anti-Zionist. So part of what happened in my progression has been to fall in love with Israel and to fall in love with Israel. I've been asking myself, am I a Zionist? I'm a little suspicious of isms. And so, but what I will say is this: I love going there. I believe I love the place, and I desperately want peace. I want peace for the Israelis and for the Palestinians, as I imagine do we all who are in this room. The thing that has perplexed me, and the thing that I have found difficult, but also challenging, because I'm not used to having someone I love who's really, since my parents, I haven't had someone until Menachem, who I was that close to, with whom I did not totally agree on everything, which is suspicious. Anyhow, so it's been cool that we don't totally agree, that we don't have this perspective. But the other thing is that our conversation is often so, not often, always, really so free and flowing, just the conversations that we have, except about Israel. Except about Israel. And I find myself like stepping like some sort of horrible, brutish animal, like just stepping on your dreams. Like as I'm talking, like I will say things that are wrong, or that, and also I'm aware of also that your knowledge is a lot more knowledge than I had about Israel. But here's my perspective. I feel sometimes, Menachem, I feel some of there was a thing that my parents had about the Soviet Union. They believed the Soviet Union was awesomely great. They believed it was great, and they believed that Stalin was great. Let me say now, I am not making an equation between Israel and the Soviet Union. I like Israel a lot better. And it seems more Jewish. But there is something which I find, and which I find sometimes as I follow with great pain, your signals that you send out to the world through the social media, and your pain and your great pain, because I love you so much, and also because I love this, I love the people you're talking about and that you care about. I feel sometimes that the ideology is distorting, is driving to use an example, without finishing that sentence, but to use an example, take the issue of the civilians who have been killed, and the children, the innocent people. This is obviously a huge, contentious issue right now, just to jump into it. Incredibly, just horrifyingly awful. I have a question in my own mind, and I don't have the answer to it, but I have a question about whether the Israeli government and the Israeli the Israeli leadership is making the right decisions in doing the things that they've been doing. And my instinct, as a peacenik and a fuzzy person, right? But my instinct is to say, there must be a way for not all of these innocent people to be killed. Now, you have been writing powerfully and passionately about how this was caused by Hamas, that basically Hamas uses the shields, they use the people as, and I believe it, by the way, I believe what you say, I really don't like Hamas. But the thing for me is that you're talking about, there seems to be a thing, and this goes back to where I felt like I fell out of, like I was kicked out of, no, I fell out of solidarity with so many of my fellow Jews, like sometime in the past 5 decades. That when I was a kid, it felt like we're all in the civil rights movement. Not all of us, not my grandparents, but they're sort of creepy. But then almost all other Jews were, right? But then the Israel thing happened, right? And there was sort of a test about that you have to be a certain kind of absolutely pro, absolutely, they're absolutely right all the time. And I know you're not like that because you're incredibly nuanced about stuff. But now I have to get over this whole like worshiping of you thing because it's really sort of, it's kind of fucking with me. So, but I just think sometimes like you'll just say like, you'll say, well, they had to do it. Like, for example, in those things like, this is what Israel had to do. Now I know Israel has to defend itself. I know Israel, I feel Israel's incredibly endangered, of course it is. But did they have to do that in particular? As I told you before in your office, I don't, and this isn't like an intellectual, well it is sort of, I don't like Netanyahu. I don't like him. I find him creepy. I don't like his hair. I don't like the way he talks. I don't like the way that I feel like when he talks and when AIPAC, which you belong to and which triggered this whole thing, the thing is I wrote to Menachem, I said, you know, I love you, you're fantastic, but you keep writing all this stuff from AIPAC about how great AIPAC is. And it's freaking me out because to me, AIPAC represents the thing that tells me, Josh, you are not a Jew, really, or you're not qualified, or our disagreements, your disagreements, Josh, are not valid. Or they're not valid, and they mean you either hate yourself, or you hate Jews, or it just means bad things about you. And it isn't that we disagree. And then I noticed that this happens like from government to government to government. So if the government in Israel changes and the government is always right, it becomes kind of weird that you're always following it. And to me, that, and it's really important, and I want to say some other thing. You wrote something, and I read everything you write. I actually had it set up on my phone, right? It's pretty interruptive, because Menachem tweets like every few seconds. He's actually tweeted while he was in the audience and I was performing. He tweeted, I heard it. So, but when well, one of the things that you wrote is you have to stand for something, and you wrote this at a time, I also have to just say this, I'm sorry, but I have to say this, but I am so in pain about this situation, and specifically because my dear friend and teacher is in such pain. It is so hard to see you attacked for things, well, like for being Jewish, for example, by like anti-Semitic slurs and things like that. And, that's right, I'm committing to and instead of but. And, I feel that there are times when I read what you write and I go, yeah, I agree, yeah, absolutely. And then I go, no, I don't know that Israel, I don't know that that's true. And then the way you're writing makes you feel like, wait, if I don't say, no, Israel's doing exactly the right thing right now, then I am trying to kill Israel, and I'm trying to end Israel, and I know that you express and that you feel that we're all God's children, that every mental thing for me is that all children are equal, all people are equal, no one is better than no one else. A Jewish life, a Palestinian life, all lives are equal and equally sacred. right? I know you believe that and you say it, but if I'm feeling, and it's really hard not to feel this for me, if I'm feeling that the particular tactics that Israel is doing at a particular time are resulting in the unnecessary murder of people, killing of people, and if I suspect, without having the knowledge or the depth of knowledge or whatever, but if I suspect, because I've lived 55 years and you're just a youngster, so allow me to give you some perspective. But I have seen a lot of this back and forth stuff, as have you. A lot of, we will wipe out the other side and then be done with it. And finally we will be done with it. And it never ends. It never ends. It has occurred to me that perhaps it never can end. Or if it ends tragically. I don't know the answer to that. I feel like I'm going over my introductory time. But I just want to say this. First of all, it's really weird to use the God mic in a shul. The other is that I read this book. I just read this book. Did you guys read it? Did a bunch of you? Yeah. It's It really rocked me, this book. But what the impression I got from that, there's a Simpsons episode where Homer Simpson is in a church and there's an apocalypse happening. He picks up the Bible and he's looking for something to do. He goes, there are no answers in this book. Well, I found there are no answers in this book. And I was convinced by this book that there are no answers. There is no answer. What there is a process. What there is how we can choose to live. And how we, in our community, here, throughout as American Jews, in our extended community, and as Jews internationally, as people, as human beings, how we choose to conduct ourselves and how we choose to live. This situation, when you read it, is just endlessly tragic. Shavi, for those who haven't read it, is incredibly blunt about the horrible, horrible injustice that has been done to Palestinians by Israelis in the formation of Israel. He writes about it in depth. He also writes in a way that indicates that it's necessary, that it was necessary. One thing for me, because I don't know the history so well, is to see that what's happening now has been happening. It's been happening for 100 years, and then of course it's been happening in other ways for thousands of years. There are times in the book where I actually had to stop reading for a second. I had to actually stop and gasp. I actually gasped. And I stopped reading. And a lot of these places were descriptions of the Holocaust. Menachem, I feel I'm going to cut to the chase. This is my dream. My dream is that American Jews, to start with, that American Jews we can stop yelling at each other. We can stop questioning each other's love of Israel and love of Jewishness or being Jewish. There are some who want Israel to end. They're not in this conversation. What I'm hoping is that there are enough of us, and I think there are a lot, who would love to have peace or a negotiated settlement, something that's negotiated apart, which I think is this partition that pretty much everyone agrees on about where the land is. Anyhow, maybe we'll get into that. But I wish that we could stop yelling at each other and that we could actually all join forces powerfully, and I'm going to use as a shorthand, AIPAC and J Street. I'm going to say, I wish, this is my dream, this is actually my image dream of this group, of us, is that we all simultaneously, after the meeting, joined both and alternately challenged both organizations, even though I think AIPAC's like way bigger. But the idea being that I would love to be an AIPAC, and AIPAC represents me and doesn't use me as like someone who is to be spoken to as a child, who is not to be raising contradictions. So,
I'll start here. You took the time to affirm our love, so I want to not reciprocate because that would take too long, but I do want to say that I treasure you, not only because you're a person, but because you're Josh, and because the things that Josh believes in are really, really redemptive. They are very important for the sake of humanity. Of course we disagree about part of what you said, but I don't think it's much. The dream that you shared sounds lovely, sounds amazing. It sounds unlikely, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth shouting as a dream. I'm going to float around, not exactly in response to the things that you said in order, but in response to you speaking. The book rocked my world also, and I had to put it down many times. It took me a very long time to read. And I don't know, I'm going to go back to it soon. The chapter that was released first as a long essay, an extended essay in the New Yorker about Vida, for those who didn't see it, it had been released much earlier, very powerful, very upsetting, and reminiscent of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, in profoundly upsetting ways. For anyone who thinks there's only one narrative around the early days of Israel, the state of Israel, that is now a conversation we're not going to have either, because there is not one narrative about the founding of the state. And to the question of its necessity, the founding of the state, I don't think there's an argument that it wasn't and isn't necessary. And for those who would parse it and say there was a need and there no longer is a need, I took the time, just to prove you right, to post on Facebook just before we sat together. I posted this a half an hour before we sat down, and I said, timely crowdsource for programs starting in 30 minutes. Name one place in the world where anti-Semitism has reared its ugly head during the last 5 weeks. I'm just going to read the ones that people offered. I haven't looked at it since I posted it. Spain, France, Ireland, Twitter, the US, Paris, Scotland, Holland, Gaza, Florida, Emeryville, Germany, Facebook, England, Chile, Peru, France, Seattle, Portland, Oregon, Belgium, Norway, trying not to say the same thing twice, Egypt, Berkeley, South Africa. Wouldn't it be easier to list places where it hasn't? New York City, Switzerland. I'm naming this not because I want to go back and forth with facts, but because the trauma that the Shoah represents is not in the past tense. The founding of the State of Israel is not because of the Shoah, but the need for the State of Israel is absolutely made clear by that. The founding of the state is based on the right to self-determination on the part of a people who called that place home. It is not the only people that called that place home, which is why it sucks so bad right now for everyone around the world who has a heart. So I want to get to the heart of what you said, but I also want to point out that some of the assumptions that you made about the two of us are, well, assumptions. The observations you made about the two of us are true. The assumptions about people in this room, I believe, are partially true. The idea that we don't all, let me start this way. You said, we all believe Israel has to protect itself. I don't believe that anyone in any white group would say, I, to that, uniformly. That is a very serious problem when it comes to being in the Jewish diaspora, of which we are a part. And Berkeley is a very complicated part, given its history as really the heart of an anti-Zionist movement, not only within the Jewish community, but beyond. So that takes form in the Peace and Justice Council here, that takes form at City Hall, that takes form at San Francisco City Hall, and it certainly takes that form on campus all the time, where people who are struggling to wear both color stickers in those conversations, right? For BDS, they wore green, and a few people in that room who were anti-BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, wore blue. The people who wore blue left the room with anti-Semitic slurs, said them under the breath as they left. So part of what I want to point out, and this is a place where we get into very big problems, is that the delineation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is a fickle line at best. Because theoretically, I'm sure we could make an argument that could hold water that they're not the same, but in practicality, in experience, they are always linked. It is not true that every one person who takes one of those positions takes the other, but the coalitions that form, when that is the ethos, are absolutely tinged by anti-Semitism. The swastikas that have been placed many places around the world in these last weeks, the murder of a rabbi walking to shul in Florida, just walking to shul on Saturday, the attack in Belfast of Chaim Herzog's birth home, the place where he was born. He was the first president of Israel. There are too many to list, but the almost firebombing of a synagogue in Paris, and die-ins in Boston where people just lie down and die to protest the very same civilian deaths that I protest in Gaza, that we as a shul say Kaddish for, that we don't yell at people for disagreeing because, frankly, I don't like Netanyahu. He is my prime minister. And the same way that I marched and shouted at President Bush because I disagreed fundamentally with many of his ideas, with the invasions into Iraq and Afghanistan. Does that make me less an American for shouting my disapproval of a decision made on a national level? The answer is no, that's patriotism. But it is Zionism that leads me to really not like Netanyahu. It is Zionism that leads me to believe in the ethical practice of unfortunate warfare. That's why there is such a thing as ethical warfare. It is disgusting. It is absolutely repugnant to imagine that anyone should need to die. That any civilian, anywhere, I forget the word civilian, that any human being, an image of God, should be erased. I protest that. I do that when it comes to gun violence in the United States, and I do that when it comes to human beings in Gaza. When the terror tunnels that used to be smuggling tunnels, right? This is a very important thing that the media has largely missed. The tunnels that have been burrowed underneath the borders between Gaza and Israel and Gaza and Egypt were partially for goods when there was a full Israeli blockade in place. The flotilla was a place that made our whole community erupt, and Turkey certainly went crazy. There's a new one planned, and the deaths that happened there were because of terrible, terrible practices trying to stop the smuggling of weapons, which were found on the ship. The tunnels that were used for smuggling were then hijacked by Hamas. When Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, there were elections that took place 2 years after in the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. The majority of the seats that were won by Hamas. But some were won by Fatah, a more moderate leadership group within the Palestinian populace, of which Abbas is the president. The Palestinian Authority was a different authority at that point from Hamas. Hamas, for the first time, entered into the election. They won a majority of the seats and then staged a brutal massacre, a military coup of the Fatah officials who had won. So Hamas ran Gaza and then took over the smuggling tunnels that had been in place during occupation, the occupation that ended in 2005. Hamas turned them into terror tunnels, digging them under Israel. And you can see photos of them. They are not just tunnels. They are sophisticated places from which to launch terror attacks on kibbutzim and in Israel and within Egypt. There was just today another one discovered in Egypt. So I don't think anyone thinks Hamas is doing good things. That's fine. But when I end that sentence and say, but I don't agree that what Israel did in response was necessary, we agree with the premise, we agree with the facts on and under the ground. We agree about 3,000 plus missiles that have flown at millions of civilians. It is one thing to point to we don't know the numbers actually, but let's presume it is 1,800 Palestinians were killed during the last round until, I think, yesterday. It was 1,834 Palestinians had died. People argue about the percentages, about who is a combatant and who is a civilian. That is so disgusting. As if terrorists should die too. Nobody should die. The question is, how do you respond to terror? What did the United States do when one terror attack happened? So what do? You fire back in as pinpoint a way as possible, but when Hamas is very skilled at the PR wars, right, it actually is a no-win situation. It's a morally impossible situation to navigate. There is no way to defend yourself and not cause civilian casualties, which is why those tunnels were built under mosques. And those weapons were transported in UN ambulances and in schools. And 800,000 tons of cement that Israel shipped into Gaza to build infrastructure were used to build these tunnels. Now, I can't help but be in pain, but I also am done, as some of you might have read, I am done apologizing. I am done apologizing for Israel's right to exist, which no one out loud is saying it has no right to. But when Israel does what it must as a sovereign nation to protect itself, and has its process questioned in any way that I would do to my country here, and that I would do as a Jew in Israel, and that delegitimizes its actual defense, what other kind of defense would be possible? There was a jumble of thoughts in that. Let me give you one of the ways it spells out. There is no other group in the United States besides AIPAC that has lobbied the Congress to support the funding of Iron Dome. Iron Dome has stopped hundreds of missiles from killing Israeli civilians. So I hate the rhetoric that people have been using, saying, so you want more of us to die so it won't be disproportionate? I hate that. There's some truth to it, though. Iron Dome has saved the life of people I know. Iron Dome saved my life. I stood in the foreign ministry meeting with the Israeli ambassador to Geneva and watched Iron Dome knock out a missile over my head. There will be some conspiracy theorist who will say you didn't see anything, they planted it there so that you, the American rabbi, would see a poof of smoke and come back and lobby for Israel. Well, I'm alive, and I don't take that for granted. My brother-in-law, soon-to-be brother-in-law, they're getting married in December, in Tel Aviv, tweeted the most terrifying thing I have ever read. This is not Germany in the 1930s, right? That's not what he tweeted. That's my premise, my framing of it. He tweeted, you can't get to a bomb shelter from the 41st floor of my office in Tel Aviv. So the idea that because of the incalculable, disgusting, inhuman slaughter of Gazans, that because of that, Israel should be seen as overreacting, as reacting in a disproportionate way, presumes that there is another way to act. What this book did to me, and in concert with this book, I met with the CEO of Peace Now in Jerusalem, who has no hope for peace. No one on the ground in Israel, no one on the ground in Gaza believes peace is possible right now. No one believes it. They're barely holding on to 72 hours of ceasefire, violated 7 times so far by Hamas, before it was over each time. The messianism of the left, which Shavi points out, is the idea, and this gets back to the legitimacy of the Palestinian narrative, is actually a way of understanding Israel's need to defend itself in these ways. The idea of peace now, of the Oslo Accords, of which I was and remain a far naive supporter. I want to believe in that. I know where I was when Rabin was assassinated, and in that moment, the Jewish leaders that were there in DC, I was a college student, we were just all shattered. Because he was leading us to peace. He was. I believed it. But if I take away your entire home, and then tell you I'll give you back your backyard, so that there'll be peace, there's no denying that Israel's founding was for Palestinians a Nakba. a disaster, a catastrophe. The chapter on Lida makes it impossible to ignore. If you feel like ignoring it, read the book and then cry with me. There's no ignoring it. The founding of Israel dislocated hundreds and thousands of Palestinians from their homes, homes that are now occupied or lived in, or whatever word you want to use on your political part of the sphere, by Israelis. And there are Israelis who have dug archaeological sites all around the Kotel, the Western Wall, to prove which strata was there first. Who's the deepest? Who is the oldest? As if that would be a reason to hurt someone. So let me be very clear about the Zionism that I espouse. Israel is the project of the Jewish people. It is a project in process. It is far from perfect. There is racism with Israeli Arabs. There is inequality when it comes to the Druze who didn't have bomb shelters built for them in time. There was absolutely fascism within certain politicians in the Knesset, including, I don't mind being on film, this will be on YouTube soon, and he'll call me, I'm sure, Moshe Feiglin, who is the Deputy Speaker of the House, who is a fascist, Avigdor Lieberman, who is an intolerant something else, and I just can't find the words of a rabbi. I don't think Israel's perfect. I don't think military people make the right decisions every time. But the idea that there was another decision to make, that we can know better, is morally offensive to me. Not because it doesn't come from the same heart that I cherish, which is yours, and frankly, which is mine. But I don't want to die. I don't want my sister to die. I don't want my mother to die. And I don't want my cousins, the Palestinians, to die either. But there has to be Jewish space to mourn Jewishly for Jews who are being threatened and killed. There has to be a space, a Jewish space, to mourn Jewish soldiers who died defending Jews. I hate war. I held a gun once, very recently. I'm going to talk about it on Yom Kippur. I'm an anti-gun violence activist, if you didn't know, and so holding a gun for me is basically just being trapped in a nightmare. I'm holding death. I don't want war. And I believe, because I know, that the perception that disagreement is a litmus test, disagreement on Israel is a litmus test for Jewish belonging, you'll pardon me for being as fiery as I feel about this, it is a canard which is based on none of us actually having friends that we disagree with anymore. You and I can disagree fundamentally on Israel. And at AIPAC, there are politicians who speak and leaders who speak who make my heart swell, and there are people who make me gnash my teeth, and I sit down. And I'm an activist in AIPAC. I'm not satisfied with where things are. So I would say, if everyone in this room will join AIPAC and J Street, I will join J Street too, where I'll be less comfortable in AIPAC, but let's change the world by stopping making caricatures of each other. AIPAC is not that. It is not. There is a perception war that goes on vis-a-vis AIPAC and J Street. J Street just sent an email just this last week that said, we are going to be pushing the American Jewish community to rally for peace as much as it's been rallying for Israel. And that was morally repugnant to me too. Because at the Israel rally where I spoke in San Francisco last week, in the Israel rally in Boston, in the Israel rally in France, in the Israel rally in London, in Australia, and in Israel, you hear Israelis singing peace songs. There is no death to anybody at these rallies. And at AIPAC, there is no hatred officially, but there are plenty of bigots in the seats. And in this shul too. We are a place of love. But there's fundamentalism in some seats. So are we not allowed to disagree because we know that there's someone loud who wants to hurt me for my opinion in the seat? Well, I'm the rabbi of the shul. That happens to me all the time. I'd be saying nothing. So what I want to do is challenge us, and I'm going to hand the mic back to Josh because I've definitely exceeded my time. But what I want to do is challenge you. Speak your heart. Speak for human rights. And imagine for a second that a humanist like me can also be a Zionist. Imagine that a humanist can be a Zionist, and a Zionist can be a humanist, and that a Zionist can actually have loudest in their heart peace, And a grounded reality recognizing that peace is not going to come when I give a dislocated people back their backyard. And that the missiles that have been coming from Gaza in non-stop during ceasefires, and the tunnels that were built way before this, they are there, and they are facts on and under the ground. So after I was on a KQED interview with Michael Krasny recently, I reflected on this very, very unfortunate setup, and I say unfortunate because it happened a while ago, but if you'd spoken to me then, I just would have been crying. Because there were two people who were pro-Palestinian who went first for the first half hour, and the pro-Israel side wasn't in the room. So number one, the idea that a pro-Israel side is not pro-Palestinian is totally hurtful and incredibly inaccurate. I believe in two states for two peoples, not only because of the basic survival of Israel, but also because they have a right to self-determination. So the idea that we couldn't be in the room at the same time and had to be posed as opposites was absolutely upsetting, given especially how horrible everything is. We should sit in the room and just weep. And then I listened to what one of them said. Now, because I knew that I wasn't going to be in the room at the same time, I emailed one of the speakers the night before saying, I just wish we were in the same room at the same time, so we could meet each other, and maybe after Ramadan we can have coffee. Let's just have a relationship that no one is watching. He responded to me pretty quickly. So when I got there an hour early, just to be in the same space as them. He and I shook hands. I shook hands with the other person who was speaking. He and I had a it was a very hard conversation. We weren't really saying much. She, the other person who was speaking, wouldn't meet my eyes. And then when she spoke, she said the thing that clarified for me, not only that the position I've been taking is realistic, but that it is necessary, which is this. Michael Krasny asked her, so you say that the missiles will stop. When will the missiles stop? When will the missiles stop? She said the missiles will stop after the occupation is over. He said the occupation ended in 2005. She said the missiles will stop when the occupation of 1948 is over. I am not trying to score points by saying that. My heart grieves that that is the commitment that many people have. The only way forward will be, as Yossi Klein Halevi, the author of another book called Like Dreamers, said to me the first time I was in Israel recently. He said, we don't think about the long term here. We think about making it till tomorrow. So if we hold peace in all its allure, in all of our spiritual humanist commitments, if we hold that as the litmus test by which success will be measured when it comes to statesmanship by the Palestinians or by the Israelis, we're going to only be disappointed. I will always be praying for peace. I don't stop praying for peace. I also said to someone who said, you were pretty articulate on Krasny. I said, thanks, I'm good at saying I don't want to die and I don't want to kill you either. I'd like us all to be saying that. Because if we all were saying that, there would already be a Palestine. And so to my friend Josh, what I say is, I know what you're saying. I don't disagree fundamentally with anything you're saying. I hear you saying many times, I believe what you're saying, but. I believe what you're saying, but. And the but always leads to a shared ideology of human life. But it isn't grounded in a real politic. There's no comparison between Stalin and Israel. There is none. There is fascism in every government. I could point to parts of the American government and say that part of what we should be doing is making sure that that doesn't take root. We can agree that that would be good for America, and its presence doesn't delegitimize Israel. I'm saying now, America's right to be, and therefore in the same way, Israel. So I hand back to you this question. Given the reality on the ground that you see, not given our love for each other, which you should know there's this great mission around the year 400 that says, a love that is based on anything won't last, but a love that is unconditional will. Ours is going to last. I'm not particularly worried. And I also think that we dream in the same way for Israel, for Palestine, and for the world. Given that we agree about all that, and given that I don't know everything on the ground, or under it, or over it in Israel, between Gaza and Israel, what is an actual way forward that you see, not a dream, but on the ground, What needs to change?
Well, my hope is for, I'm speaking as someone who's not in Israel, not in Palestine. My hope is, as I said earlier, my dream is for an incredibly, overwhelmingly united American Jewry that says we demand out of love and respect, and we demand, or we push for, we want, we will do everything we can to have a negotiated two-state solution along lines that have been pretty much consistent over the course of, for quite a while now. Now, how do I want, you ask me, how do I deal with bombs coming at me, missiles coming at me? I'm afraid. I'm terrified. And I feel, as someone who lives not in terror, that it is, and as a Jew, that it's my responsibility to try to do what I can, to do what I can in a process that people are not able to who are engaged in the actual warfare. I want to go back to, I don't know how much we disagree on, which makes for a bad debate. But what I hear when you talk is I hear you disagreeing with various types of people. And those types of people often intersect with me. Here's what we agree on. We agree on Israel has to protect itself. Israel must have a strong military. We agree on that. We agree that Israelis and Palestinians both should have a state. We agree on that. We're both against war and against killing. We take that bold stand, right? But, so I'm looking for what it is that we actually disagree on, because when you talk about the racists, I am not an anti-Semite. David Mamet might think I am, but but it's really just one person. Yeah, he was sitting there. But pretty much anyone else, him and Dershowitz. But aside from that, and at least one of them I love his work. So it's a sad thing. But I am not an anti-Semite. I would stand in front of this shul, and maybe will be called to defend it with my life. And another shul. So when you're angry at the people who are anti-Semites, is the world filled with anti-Semitism? Oh yeah, it is filled with anti-Semitism. Yeah, so we agree on that. We don't disagree on that. It feels to me that you are angry at people who are mostly on your side. And let me not make that generalization. Let me make it about myself. You are angry about things that I am also angry about. What I take as a great lesson from you, and what I took as a great lesson from your statement, everyone has to stand for something. We all must stand for something. You're quoting someone else, to be fair. But what I took from that is that this is something that I have not done. What I have not done is passionately defended Israel in any way that I can. What I have not done is actively gone out and actively said, this is why Israel must live, this is why I believe in it, this is why it had to happen, this is why it must be preserved, this is why I love it, and this is how I am connected to Israel as a Jew. I have not made those, and I need to make more steps like that. And I feel a lot of that, when you tell me about the passion at AIPAC as opposed to kind of when you consider me less passionate at J Street. You know, I get, and I'm not at J Street either, I mean, but I feel that from you, and I feel that that passion is important. I owe that as a Jew, as an American Jew. I owe it to be passionate in my support of Israel. I completely, and, okay. The occupation. I said the word occupation at a talk back in Phoenix. I was doing a show, a Jewish-themed show, and I said the word occupation, and people started hissing at me from the word occupation. That was the first time I even heard, what, there's a question? But when I read the paper, read the paper, hear the news, I feel the horrible tragedy for the Jewish people, and equally, the horrible tragedy for the Palestinians. And the Palestinians are living in Gaza in a situation that no one should have to live in. They're essentially, from my perspective, imprisoned. They're trapped. And there is a dialectic that Shavit sets up with Israel. And the dialectic is between, it's two things. He says it's the only Western-ish, Western sort of nation that occupies. It is also the only one that is existentially always in danger. And to me, the fact of the settlements, and we visited a settlement together when we were in Israel, our whole group did, it was really disturbing. I mean, it was just one settlement, but the settlers, well, she was from Queens, you know, so already, you know. But she was talking about the Palestinians the way, like the, oh, I'm not really racist slaveholder would talk about blacks. Some of them are my best friends, and they're my best friends around whom I'm always carrying a loaded gun. They're my best friends who work for me. Now, I have read this book now, and I feel like the tragedy keeps going back. We can keep digging down. We can keep digging down. We all deserve to be on this earth, and this is a tiny little area that is tremendously important for the identity of these two groups of people. And therefore, there must be one or another way of solving it. One way of solving it is by getting rid of one of the groups of people. Getting rid of them. The other way to solve it is to have a truce, a negotiation, security, international safeguards. I'm not an expert in, like, maybe that wouldn't work, but it seems to me those are the only two options.
So I want to very quickly respond and then give us the chance to talk to each other.
But I wasn't done.
Yeah. Do you want to go?
Just a little more. Okay. But say what you're going to say. It's supposed to be a dialogue.
David Volpe says Jews don't talk to each other, they just take turns. I
got this thing when we spoke together at the JCC in San Francisco, and someone came up to me and said, well, your rabbi got much bigger laughs than you did. Look, I'm doing my best.
So one point of clarification is, I don't think J Street is less enthusiastic than AIPAC. I think AIPAC is more diverse than anyone gives it credit for being. And in Berkeley, of course, that's the line that would get hisses, right? Except I really believe it. And the idea that people would be shut down for speaking their minds is a general problem. When's the last time a Democrat here spoke to a Republican, really?
I did.
Well, you're weird. I mean, really, you're a dialogically principled person. You're a monologuist who does dialogue.
But I think also, Menachem, I think there's a way in which, and I don't know, there's a way in which I feel you are setting up an opposition. Yep. You're setting up more opposition than there needs to be.
So, in dialogue, tell me where I have set up an opposition at all.
Well, here's an opposition where you feel that, like, and for example, I feel for you, but you feel when students demonstrate for BDF, is that boycott divestment, right? That's something like, it's pretty damn nuanced, okay? It's like, here's the thing, I read one of the two books that were assigned for this. It's this book by Peter Beinart, which basically says it's that we should boycott the settlements, boycott the occupied territory.
We have to jump in so that we can speak to each other on this one. Like, I don't disagree with I don't disagree with the legitimacy of his position, and that is not BDS campaigns on campus.
It isn't, but if you're
the nuanced approach of BDS, which actually, theoretically, as nonviolent protest, is very, very cool, is not the way that it happens on campus or in City Hall. Because it's not about a nuanced BDS that Beinart is suggesting. It is the wholesale attack on Israel, which has been done every time there's a BDS campaign. I just challenge you the next time it comes up on campus to go and just listen. There were 1,000 screaming people in that room on campus last time, all screaming that no one was hearing them.
But I will, let me speak for the screamers. Let me speak for the screamers. It is tremendously painful to me as a Jew that a Jewish state oppresses.
So I'm going to jump in and say I agree, and if you remember, when I designed the itinerary for the trip that we went on, I said we weren't going across into the occupied territories. I said the occupied territories. I said I didn't want to go based on my political convictions, because I think that they are a cancer in Israel, and my far to the left tour guide friend, Jared Goldfarb, who's going to be here as a Shalom resident in November, who's leading this coming Israel trip in June from the shul, he's the one who said, Menachem, I understand why you don't want to go into the shtachim, to the territories. He said, I don't believe we should have them. But you said this was a tour with diverse opinions. Everyone you chose agrees with you. That's the only reason we went. I don't want to go there, so the idea that I shout down someone who believes that we shouldn't have the shtachim is itself forgetting the actual Zionism that I espoused. And I know that you didn't say it in those words.
I didn't say it, I don't... Wait, we have like 103 people. I don't think I said it in any words. I mean, did I?
I'm not sure, but it felt like that. So let me ask you to clarify, like, what is it?
But that's the thing is, ask.
Yeah, no, so what is it that let's just be really Berkeley. In what way do the things that I said feel like they were not granting you? I was having fun with that. How was I excluding?
Well, I'll speak for myself. The idea of boycotting and divesting things, the businesses in the territory, in the occupied territories, is, to me, seems like an excellent idea. Right? It's an excellent idea. It could be that the movement has been co-opted, as you said. That hasn't been my experience yet. I believe it in a way. I tend to believe it because you tell me and you're all plugged in and stuff. But I don't believe it. I don't believe that, and I'm not in. If there's a kind of like that you're conflating in a way that you're criticizing. As you're criticizing properly, people. You're saying if you're anti-Zionist that you are definitely anti-Jew. Actually, I don't even know if you said that. Okay, here. What am I trying? I think you are making this enemy. Not that there isn't an enemy. That enemy is not me. You know that about me, because you know me. But I think it's also not just me, not just I, who's not an enemy, but it's also a lot of other people who are also not enemies.
I agree. The idea that someone who, no, let me say this. I'm not sure exactly how to respond, because the striving for the debate is actually not necessarily the conversation we're actually having, right? So I don't actually think we disagree about anything except one essential thing.
Which is?
Trust.
Trust of whom?
Trust that Israel is acting in an ethical way. I don't think that we disagree about our dreams for peace. I even think that were we both to become policy wonks, we would see peace much further down the road, and steps that would be confidence building along the way that we would both agitate for. I think that we both agree that the absolute abject poverty and disgrace of life in Gaza is a travesty and, I would say, an affront to God. I think that we would both say that Israel's complicated beginning in no way delegitimizes its existence today. We wouldn't disagree about the need for a state. We wouldn't disagree that Palestinians have a need and deserve a state. We haven't disagreed on anything except, as far as I can tell, trust that Israel actually agrees with us. Israel actually agrees with us. And let me just go a step further. And we might end up disagreeing about it. It's not about the possible nobility of a BDS campaign. It's about the actuality of it. It's not about the worthiness of peace. It's about the realistic hopes for it. There is a messianism that goes along with activism. There is a messianism that goes along with prayer. And I don't see the state as perfect. I also trust it to be acting in its own citizens' welfare and with regard to other human life, because if Israel wanted to end the missiles and had no regard for human life, it would be a lot uglier. And as John Stuart Mill said, war is ugly, but there are uglier things still.
That trust is a trust that I don't share. I would be happy to share it if I felt it, and I don't have it. What I perceive in that trust, and it's a relief for me to narrow this down to, because I think this is our difference. What it feels to me is a kind of faith. It's not necessarily kind of faith, like you could come to that conclusion based on what you researched and found out and say, okay, I believe this. But to me, it is a kind of, the trust is a kind of faith that is, it's not how I would, to use your analogy, how I would treat the American government. I would not treat the American government and say, I assume that because America goes into Vietnam or goes into Iraq, I'm not assuming that America's government is acting in the best interest of me and of the citizens, nor do I have that same trust of the Israeli government. I don't have it. And why, it feels like that you feel like if you don't have that faith, you will be allowing it to die, that you will be giving up, that it feels like that you must, that there is a messianic element to your relationship to the Israeli leadership.
So that is a very, very fair critique. I don't think that I have it, but I hear what you're saying.
Let's say, for example, if 10 years from now, there are studies done, research comes out, and there's a chance that you may, let's just say you may find that the things that Israel just did in Gaza, that many of the things that it did were not justified, in your opinion. Why can't you have those doubts now?
I do have those doubts now.
So then what you are expecting of us and what you are proclaiming, and this is my thing with AIPAC too, is that there is an implicit agreement, or there's an implicit understanding that we don't talk. We don't say things aloud that we actually think. We don't allow the nuances, and we don't allow the contradictions, which is the opposite of Jewish for me.
It is the opposite of Jewish, and I think you're setting up a straw man.
Because
that doesn't exist, that dynamic is foisted upon groups, any group, so it doesn't have to be AIPAC. Plenty of anti-J Street people do the same thing to J Street. Describe it as a caricature and then say why it's wrong. So that is not true, what you just said. It is not an authentic description of my Zionism. It's not an authentic description of AIPAC's leadership. The idea that I can't doubt Israel is itself sort of a description, not of messianism, but of fundamentalism. Right? The difference between the two is a matter of time, actually. Right? So, hold a second. So, there is a dynamic which is fairly well known that when under fire, there is a pulling together of disparate political parties, right? And so I'm not saying that I leave behind my skepticism when I defend my brothers and sisters with some of whom I disagree. But in this moment, right, I was in Israel, I landed in Israel, 5 weeks ago, right when the first missiles were flying, and the next morning, we met with ministers of Knesset, including, I'll just give you the names, Rabbi Dov Lipman from Yesh Atid, Stav Shafir from Labor, Nitzan Horowitz from Meretz, and Moshe Feiglin, the guy who I described as a fascist a minute ago from Likud, right? So at that table was Stav Shafir, who's 29 years old. She's the youngest minister of Knesset in Israel's history. She led Occupy Tel Aviv, and she made it onto Labor's ballot and became a minister of Knesset. Dov Lipman grew up in Baltimore. He calls himself Haredi, an ultra-Orthodox, but he's an open Orthodox kind of leader with a group called Yesh Atid, founded upon intellectual diversity and economic justice in Israel, because those are really important. Moshe Feiglin is crazy and was elected with Likud, and Nitzan Horowitz is an openly gay member of Knesset with Meretz. Used to be called the far left. Now it's just not very strong, but the left is struggling to retain its own vitality in Israel, given that the messianism of the left has been recognized on the ground by most Israelis, and therefore they've lost seats in Knesset because they aren't grounded in their politics. The messianism of any group is not grounded, which is why hopefully it doesn't gain seats in Knesset. But the reason why I do have faith in the Israeli government is because those 4 people are in the government and disagree fundamentally. And all of the parties have recognized the need for what has been happening. And in fact, some of the leftist groups, center-left, have been saying that we stopped our responses to Hamas too early. This time. Now, does that make me happy? Am I, triumphant in this? Do I feel like that is something to feel proud of, with zeal, and some sort of faith that gives me surety in the world? No, I mourn, and I grieve, and I hope to God they're wrong. Not only because I hope the horrors for Israelis and for Gazans are over, but because I'm sick of the spiral of death. I'm not sick of the spiral of death for Jews. I'm sick of the spiral of death. And the idea that there is some fundamental place where we disagree, or that I'm a blind supporter of Netanyahu because I am an unconditional lover of Israel, that is a conflation that absolutely misses the nuance of my Zionism. Zionism is bigger than most people see it to be, especially those who are willing to reject it before exploring it.
And that's something that you've taught me, which is a huge part of my life now. And I think we should, we said people should be able to talk to each other, that would be, an awesome thing to do. But I want to say this, that when you have a situation in which one group, one side has enormous power and control over another side, as in the case of Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied territories, that when you have that situation and you have a diversity of opinion where you can sit with 4 people around the table who disagree.
They wouldn't appear at the same time.
They wouldn't appear at the same time? Okay. But even that you could meet with those 4 people, that doesn't take away the fact that what is happening right now is this power dynamic. And that power dynamic means that millions of people live abjectly. And that you can pray for everyone to be happy. You can pray for people not to fight and not to suffer. But while you're praying, at that moment, the children and the adults who are trapped in the occupied are living the life that they're living, and others are living the life that they're living. And in order to change that, something needs to change.
Here's what we're going to do. We've got 6 minutes left to the scheduled time. And it's going to be 6 minutes before we're done, because that's the commitment that we've made. But we are getting together next week, and we will continue the conversation I will be more mindful of the time that I use so that we can have more time as a community to talk. I do want to make this suggestion in terms of how we use the end of this portion of our time.
Oh no, I just wanted to say, like, could we go like a half hour long?
No.
Well, apparently not.
So what I'm going to suggest in terms of using the energy in the room in a way that actually will lead us back into it, instead of allowing, you know, the hard parts of what either one of us might have said to be the thing that you're stuck with, focus on each other for a moment. Look someone else in the eye. I've been told by therapists not to tell people to do that, but I'm going to still suggest, just look at the person next to you. And after about, you know, a second of doing that, because that's already very intense, name one thing you wish would change. Take the time. We don't have enough, but take the time to look someone else in the eye and name one thing that you wish would change. Don't worry about it being what one of us named. When we get together next week, we'll reconstruct the format of the evening so that we have more time to talk to each other. But let's use the time that we have well. So let's take these 6 minutes, meet the person next to you if you don't know them, and name something big.